This time we'll do it with a bit of Spanish, if you allow me. Let me tell you that it's a great pleasure to have Maisa Rojas with us. She's the Minister of the Environment from Chile, just out of a plane. This is her first international trip. She's just basically taken over as Environment Minister in the new Chilean government. And we are extremely excited to hear what she has to share with us. We have had, as you know, today an intensive day dedicated to climate change. It's important that we never lose focus on the sea that climate represents. It's still with us. As we just heard, it requires urgent action. It requires committed citizens, that we all are, but it also requires enlightened governments. And what Maisa represents today is enlightened governments. So Maisa, without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor on to Shiv to moderate this session and to see the messages that you want to leave with us today, messages that will be heard and will resonate here, given where they come from, after which, obviously, all of you will get the chance to put your questions or your comments to the Minister. Without further ado, Shiv, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean Gonzalez. Welcome, Minister Rojas. What I'd like to have you do is speak as long as you want, as long as it's less than 20 minutes. Okay. And then we'll really open it up for Q&A. And then what I'd like to have the audience do is, rather than take one question at a time, it helps to have maybe 2 or 3 questions, so that then if there are any overlaps, the Minister can actually then deal with them in whatever way she thinks is appropriate. But if you think that the speaker is not being fair to your question, then please feel free to re-ask the question again. All right? So now, Minister, please, the floor is yours.
Ça marche? Ah oui, ça marche. Bon, bonjour. Je suis vraiment enchantée d'être ici devant vous, de partager quelques idées du nouveau gouvernement de Chili, de Gabriel Boric, et bien sûr les projets de réforme de notre ministère, le ministère de l'Environnement. But I will now continue in English, which is a language that I speak much better. Shall I stand? I think I will stand because otherwise I can't. But then well, okay. We'll try to
do you want me to do it
for
you?
No, that's fine. I will do it from here. Okay, so very, very briefly, really. Before I talk about what is going on in Chile and what our plans are for the work that we have to do, I wanted to put in context the level of urgency of addressing the climate crisis. And you might have seen these slides before. This one in particular is from the Working Group 1 report of the IPCC that was launched last August. Recent changes are widespread, rapid, and intensifying. And many are unprecedented in the last 100 years, hundreds of years, thousands of years, and even 100,000s of years. And this message is then complemented by this one from Working Group 2 report that was published on the 28th of February, so just a month ago. And it also says that the evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human health and to human well-being and the health of the planet. And unless we take urgent action, this very, very short window of opportunity is rapidly closing to secure a livable future. I think this is an incredibly powerful message of the level of urgency from the point of view of the adaptation that we have to do to climate change. So the last one is to avoid mounting losses. Urgent action is required, of course, to adapt to climate change that is already occurring. But we should never forget that we need also to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Sometimes these two aspects are emphasized in different ways. And I think we should start to really forget that we can do one or the other, or some countries are more interested in one and the other. We really need to do both and to do it very, very quickly. Okay, so that is the context that I know you're probably very well aware of. And in that context, last December, Gabriel Boric became the youngest, well, no, he became now in March the youngest, but he won the election as the youngest ever president of Chile. And he says that it will be the first ecological government of Chile, which leaves me in a very complicated position because as the environmental minister, I guess it will be my job to implement that. There are four sort of transversal or axes in the government plan, and it is feminism, just ecological transition, decentralization, and decent work. And in the case of decentralization, maybe you should know that Chile, although you might think otherwise because it is such a long country, such a diverse country, it is also very, very centralized, with all the decision making occurring in Santiago and even more in just a couple of blocks around La Moneda. So that is something that is very important. So, and to advance towards a society that puts sustainability and well-being at the center. So our challenge is to put content, to that promise, right, of being the first ecological government in Chile. And this requires some changes in some paradigms that have moved the country in a certain direction over the last decades, and maybe you could even say 100 years, 200 years, etc. And because I am a scientist, of course, all of this has to be evidence-based. That's why I put also the IPCC reports. I was a coordinating lead author also of the Working Group 1 report, and I should have been participating in the synthesis report, but I have dropped from that commitment now. And something I wanted to so we know that we require transitions. This is from the latest IPCC report. I will try to explain this. So this is where we are, right? And we are in a certain position that is defined by a certain level of warming. World has already warmed 1.1 degree. We see widespread impacts of that warming already. There are certain level of developments. There are some shocks already, right? So we can think about the pandemic and the war now that put us in a rather complicated place, because we need to address all these crises and at the same time. Now, so we know more or less where we are, and we also know where do we want to be? Where do we want to be at mid-century, in the next 10 years, 30 years, or the end of the century? And this is where we want to be. We want to have a high climate resilient development. And why do we want this? Because this will mean that we will be in a world with high levels of human well-being, with lower poverty, with ecosystem health, with equity and justice, and with low warming levels, and hence, in general, in a world that has less risks than these other possible future where we basically don't cut emissions. The world warms a lot. There's a lot of risk. We are very vulnerable. There's high levels of poverty and ecosystem degradation. So we know where we want to go. Now, I think we probably all would like to, or I would like to, being a physicist sometimes, I would like to go the straight line, right? That's but of course we know that this is not going to be a straight line. The world is full of, this trajectory is full of obstacles. It is a bumpy road, as I sometimes say. And here is an example of some new shock that will come, and we can just imagine that it will come, But resilience is indeed the only way to address this, because resilience is the capacity of systems, of human system, ecosystems, to address those external shocks. Okay, so we're here, we want to be there, and think also for a country like Chile with a level of lower development as the European countries, these aspects of lower poverty, equity, and justice are very, very important. They are historically very important part of the agenda of progressive left-wing governments, and increasingly we need to understand that it is also the same agenda as for ecosystem health and addressing climate change. So, what do we need to do? I understand this. I think the president understands this, but this does not mean that this is yet mainstream. So there's a lot of work to really mainstreaming these concepts in the planning of the government. We want to do emphasis in this just part, that this transition has to be just. It cannot leave behind the ones that are usually left behind, and it should also not only just benefit the ones that are usually benefits with this transition and changes, because it will also bring a lot of benefits. And very important, we need to move into implementation. We signed the Paris Agreement over 6 years ago. We had our first national determined contributions. Most countries said their second ones. We really, really need to move into implementation. And that implementation, we're thinking, should still be at the level of piloting. We have to show that this can be replicated and that it can be scaled up. And do this all with an approach that is also decentralization and a gender equality approach. So, in concrete, what do I have to do for this first year is, we have already sent to Congress this treaty, Escazú. It's an environmental and human rights treaty of Latin America that will give a lot of the vision that we have to mainstream into government. We don't have a biodiversity service yet. It has been sitting in Congress for over 10 years. So this is a very high level of priority to have that, because otherwise there's no way that we can implement of being in an ecological government. What I do have, and I'm very happy for this, is that I already have approved a climate change law. So what I do need to do is to implement it. And I was just telling her that I really never thought that this would happen. But I participated in the discussion, in the writing of the law, in the discussion of the law, as a technical counterpart when it was in Congress. And now I will have my signature on the law as well. In the next couple of weeks, it will be, I don't know if the word exists, promulgated, I don't know. Yeah, does it exist? Okay. Okay, and then we have, of course, interesting work in doing circular economy, really we need to change the paradigm of economic development. And with respect to just transitions, we are going to implement just transition commissions. And the concept of just transition that is traditionally being thought of what to do with the workers that are being with the closing of coal mines and power plants, etc. What would we do with the workers and decent work? We're thinking that this is actually a much more global and comprehensive concept, and we want to apply it to water scarcity in Chile and also to these zones in the country that we call zones of sacrifice. And to finish, just some reflections. There are high expectations about this government. And we know that it is impossible in 4 years to solve not only a few, but I mean not on all of them, but even a few of the deep social, ecological problems that Chile has. And hence, because the expectation is high, we think that it is critical that these transitions are part of a long-term plan. And to have a long-term plan, it is very important that the design of these plans have a certain level of legitimacy. No, I can't. Well, anyway, you know what I mean. So that they can survive this government period, right? And not only the government period, because we don't know what is coming after, hopefully someone in the same line, but it could of course be, but also to survive external shocks and perturbations. I think you can already see that, you know, the whole climate deal in the countries, they are really struggling now with the fuel prices going up and how they're going to deal with this. So this is it's definitely something that is not just a problem of Chile, or I think this is really valid for most countries. And because we know, those who work in complex problems, is that this is the only way to really address complex problems, as it is the climate, the biodiversity, inequality crisis, the pandemic, the economic crisis, etc. And with that, I stop.
Thank you very much for a very honest kind of discussion to start off this. Really, I'm sure it's going to be an interesting next 45 minutes. If I may start off with the first question on a more personal note, how has been the transition from being a scientist and researcher, asking people in power to do things, to being a top-level government official? So how has the transition from talking the talk to walking the talk? So in your own words, how has it been so far? I'm just curious.
I'm curious as well, actually. It is very exciting, actually. Now, I have to say, to be very honest, I always say that, and it was true for a long time. I'm not only a scientist, but I'm also I was for a long time really a scientist who just worked in her office in front of a computer, but because I work with computer models. So not even a scientist that goes onto the field and does all these super interesting scientific stuff. But so very theoretical. But of course, I got involved with IPCC quite a few years ago for the 5th assessment report back in 2010. And there you already understand that the evidence that you're providing has to be useful but neutral and not prescriptive, of course, in the IPCC framework, right? But then I became the director of a center, it's called Center for Climate and Resilience Research, where we also provided a lot of evidence for decision making where we were allowed to make recommendations. Yeah. And I guess those years were those were sort of the first years when you had to move from what your evidence is from the paper that you write to translating this in something that can be useful. And then that was a dialogue that wasn't easy, but you start to learn what the other want. And then back in 2019, when Chile took up the presidency for COP25, I was appointed as a sort of the chief scientist. I coordinated the scientific committee. And in there, we really worked a lot on in providing evidence to the decision making. So I have been, I guess, slowly crossing the bridge between the science and the policy, and it's really quite fascinating the first steps were slow, and now it's like a jump. And I guess I haven't yet quite grasped the level of what it really means to be in the executive power of a government, and how the decision can be made. But I hope that all the background of the evidence that I can now apply, and then I have the tools. I think the climate change law in particular will give me a big tool, but I have to really make sure that that I first sort of mainstream, impregnate the rest of the cabinet, of government, to make some quite profound changes. And there, I guess I will able to answer that question much better in a year's time.
Oh, next visit already. Excellent. Thank you very much. But I think also one of the key things you have going for you is the trust that the public have in you, given your own kind of history of work. I think that's something, the kind of the social capital that you carry, in this case, into the political realm, I think is also extremely important. So we wish you all the very best in your extremely important work. So now we open it up for the questions. We do have a microphone in the back. So if you'd like to go, for sure. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. I'm Damien. I'm in the Environmental Policy Master. So we've been told we have to ask questions, 3 questions at a time. So I'm gonna.
No, you're going to be just asking one, not 3.
I'm gonna ask 3 questions.
Okay.
We just had the administrator for the EPA, U.S. administration, just before, and talking about climate actions. He talked a lot about technology and markets and so on, green investments and such. So I would like to know, how do you position yourself on this? And maybe I know. But then how do we deal with people bearing this narrative and not seeing that we need a deeper, as you said, change of paradigm in the economy and in our interaction as a global?
Lovely. That's a good question.
Do you think?
I think let's keep it, because you have 10 people behind you.
Then a really quick one. Do you think following climate agreements should be legally binding? Because they are not currently. That's all. Thank you.
That's an easy one. I'll answer yes. Should be legally binding. Go for it. Second one, please. Go. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Charlotte. I was wondering, I'm not really certain about the Chilean context, but I know a bit about Latin America. And I was wondering, how do you envision the difficulty of putting forward, of delivering on this climate law, but at the same time, this will probably mean less extractive and agricultural industry, and this is usually very political and complicated. So how do you envision this? And it's very linked to, I have another question that's very linked to that one. That is more, how do you envision market-based solutions to climate mitigation in the context of Chile?
Okay, thank you. I think those two.
Yeah, they're similar metrics.
Yeah.
Shall I?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, let me just start with Actually, with the legally binding, I'm not a lawyer, but I think that the Paris Agreement is extraordinary, actually, in his thinking, in that, in opposition to the Kyoto Protocol, everyone is on the table, or everyone has to come to the table, but everyone has the right to put onto the table what own commitments, and the ratcheted mechanism, the ambition loop, that you come to the table and I say I can commit to this, and it might be very little, but then 5 years later you have to come up and to increase your ambition. And I actually really much believe in that way of working internationally. I have big faith in that mechanism. So that's the first thing. About how to deliver our commitments of climate action. So in the law says that we will be carbon neutral at the latest by 2050, and resilient to climate, society resilient to climate. In the case of Chile, but also, which is it is a bit more extreme than the rest of the country, but 80% of our emissions come from the energy sector. On the world, it's about 70% on average. In our case, it's almost 80%. So it's really quite a lot. So a lot of our commitment to carbon neutrality is really greening the energy system. And that is I would say that's the easy part. That's where lots of opportunities are. There's lots of co-benefits of shutting down power plants with the pollution. If we move traffic from dirty buses and cars into electric cars and buses, it has a lot of also benefits in pollution and health, etc. So that part, I would say, it's relatively easy. It's seen as an opportunity. It's seen in the case of Chile in particular as an opportunity because we do not have fossil fuels. So that's why at some point someone realized, we can actually do this, and it will give us energy security, and we can also have this important, ambitious commitment towards climate action. And hence, the more difficult sectors as agriculture, and of course, I haven't said anything about mining yet, but agriculture it's sort of a bit less important. We have lots of forests as well that are taking up CO2. So the rest of the emissions that will still be there for some part of it at least, we will be able to do net with them through our forests. In the case of mining, of course, this is indeed a problem, and it has been more difficult to work with them, in particular because this green transition towards electrification in particular requires lots of critical materials like copper and lithium, where Chile is also a big producer, and hence, because we want to be an ecological government, we can not continue to extract those minerals in a way that it will completely destroy our ecosystems. So will Chile continue to export copper? Of course it will, but it will have, and will it get bigger into the lithium industry as well? I'm sure it will, but we have to make sure that it is not at the complete expense of our ecosystem. That's the difficult paradigm shift that we have to implement. And markets, I think we there's a wide range of solutions that we have for the climate crisis, and the level of urgency implies that we have to use them all. I think. And it will be market, it will be taxes, it will be education, it will be basically all of them.
So as you can see, the minister takes great pain in answering your questions. So can you please, in the interest of the rest of the folks behind you, keep the questions short and pointed? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I come from Lebanon. I'm in the International Governance and Diplomacy program. You answered part of my question, but my question is regarding the updates of and events of the Constitutional Convention that is being currently held and the future of the resources of the state, mainly lithium, and its usage in batteries. What is the ministry's role in regards to mining, as well as the undertakings of the goals such as just and inequality and water scarcity? So, just how does the dynamic of the constitution and the future of the resources play out with the vision of the ministry? Thank you.
And maybe another question, please.
Thank you. My question was based on the slide that you had, the work plan for your first year. Your point 5, the Just Transition Commission, Water and Zones of Sacrifice. Could you expand on that and talk about it a bit? Thank you.
Would you like another question?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Hola, ministra. Un gusto tenerla aquí. I have a number of questions, but I will try to keep it concise. So, and it's a bit related to the question asked previously regarding the process of the new constitution and the rights that are currently being accepted into the draft of the new constitution, especially in terms of nature and the rights of animals. How do you see the potential new constitution possibly hindering or advancing the work of the ministry, especially in terms of the rights of indigenous populations and in zones of sacrifice?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let me talk about. Yeah, I didn't mention the constitution, and I would expect that a Chilean would know about that process, but I'm very surprised that someone in Lebanon also knows about the process of the constitution. I think when I said that there are high expectation for the government, it's not just the government, but it's also that process of writing a new constitution, which was the way that that Chile, I would say, solved, but got out of the social crisis back in 2019. The new constitution clearly will give me a mandate. Will give me a mandate on how to do things, and in many ways, I think it will help me to do that paradigm shift. So let me explain it with one example, which is one of the largest impacts and the largest vulnerability of Chile of climate change is water scarcity. So precipitation is decreasing, as in many other Mediterranean type climates. So availability of water is less. And at the same time, of course, the amount of water users are increasing, and we have an incredibly fragmented governance of water in Chile. There are over 40 institutions that have, and there are other reports that say even 50 institutions that have a say in how water is handled in the country. So there has been, I would say, very not fruitful discussions on how we address this crisis, and the crisis has actually only deepened. We know that we need an authority that deals with water, but at the moment that consensus is not there yet. Yeah, I mean there are still some sectors who are they very entrenched, and they are not seeing that we really need a transformational shift, transformational change in how we deal with the water crisis. And I think the Constitution is going to give it to us. So this is good for me because I will need to fight with other ministries to tell them, look, some changes we can address with incremental changes. Some are just so big that they really need a deep transformation. In the case of our relationship with the natural resources as copper, lithium, and other elements in our mining sector, I think that there are two parts, and one of them is already understood, and I think that would already be a big step forward, and is that so Chile had saltpeter in the 19th century, and there was a lot of wealth around there, and then Germany invented the artificial saltpeter, and we have ghost towns now in the north, right? So we should not have these new need for copper and lithium and solar energy and green hydrogen again to be like our saltpeter 4.0 and again just sell it should leave something in the country. It should really be a key for a change in our economic development path. And that also brings with it that we cannot just go and destroy the ecosystem that gives us support for an important part of the development in the country. So I would say that we have to find that equilibrium. There's just no other way to do it. And with respect to the Just Transition Commission, so what we see is that we have this, we have kind of an inventory of zones of different conflicts where in the country, some of them related to water, lack of water, some of them related to sacrifice zones, which are territories, a couple of territories in the country where historically, and I'm talking about many decades, some 50 years, where we have put polluting industry and have basically, left those places to get all the pollution, and it's just not only it's CO2, it is really zones which we have basically left to sacrifice for a development that is very 20th century, and we are now in the year 2022, very well into the 21st century, and it is time that we change the way that we think about development. It cannot be at the expense of people, of ecosystem, and these in our sort of backyard, and also because only a society that allows this type of inequality to exist in the country is not able to address properly the climate crisis, because the climate crisis at the end of the day is a crisis of social inequalities.
Thank you very much. We'll have the next few questions, please.
Yes, hello. I had a little question about the management of these high expectations, because as you mentioned, it needs a paradigm shift, and also you mentioned like how important it is first to also change the inner working maybe of the government, of the different ministries. But for this, like, I know that these are processes that take a lot of time. And I mean, it would be already amazing if that already would be achieved in 4 years' time. But then I wonder how, again, can you ensure that continuity and make sure that in 4 years, on the one hand, you can create these inner changes, but also deliver and show the people also what you managed to change to hopefully then also continue on with the work in the future.
Thank you.
Hi, I have actually an additional question to that because we're talking, maybe the last question was more about how you can get enough done in kind of this 4 years that you have, but more the question I see because we're talking about this paradigm shift. And so I'm almost asking for what is the rudimentary kind of checklist that you have of a policy or an initiative that you might want to bring that is inherently going to push that paradigm shift, that leaves something past those 4 years that your administration is working on. Because if we talk a lot about these policies that do need to shift things on almost at the core fundamentally, I feel like what are the main driving forces that you are able to do that with during this time and leave something that isn't necessarily that easily changeable to an administration that comes and flips everything upside down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one more.
Buenas tardes, gracias por estar aquí. You have already partially addressed the issue of water access in Chile, but I was just wondering, in a country with such a long tradition of privatized water system, I was wondering what is the effect or the real effect that the new constitution is going to bring towards this issue, and what are the real effects that we are going to see in the economy, but also in the local communities in Chile, because I was thinking it's pretty radical to change from a completely privatized system to a public one. So is it going to be something in the middle, or how is it going to work exactly? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would you like
Yeah, if it's the last one, maybe I...
No, I think there's a last bunch, 4 of them.
Okay, I will... Okay, so how to do this, to manage the expectation in just a 4-year... I think the key here is to combine the long-term vision with the short-term measures. So that's how we see it. So, and as I said before, we know where we want to go. We know where we want to be, and how do I ensure that any decision in the short term is, on the one hand, aligned with that trajectory that will let me be at the place where I want to be, and the other one is that the roadmap, the trajectory that I'm imagining has a level of, I'm not going to say the word because just of legitimacy that will allow me for it to survive. Now, I do have a key, and the key is the climate change law. As I said, the climate change law has the objective of being carbon neutral at the latest in 2050. It defines a carbon budget, so a fixed number of CO2 that the Chilean economy can emit in this decade, and it has the responsibilities of different ministries in charge of part of that budget, so that pie of CO2 is already divided, and the Ministry of Energy is in charge of this part, and the Ministry of Transport in charge of the other one, and the one of infrastructure in charge of, and the mining has another part of that pie. And with the law, they will all have to tell me how they're doing. They have to implement the measures, and I will be able to monitor this very, very closely every year. And they have to tell it to Congress as well. So not only
It's a very
to
unusual position to be in. Most countries are simply can only dream of this.
Yeah, and so actually the first thing I really need to do urgently is to tell to people what this law actually does, because I don't think that many of the ministers already know what the level of power I will have upon them. No, but I think having this commitment and having to report, monitor, report, and verify on an annual or biannual basis will help all the sectors to start to align those pathways. So I really think that the climate change law is a very important key to helping to really to start to implement this, and very much in the line with the whole vision of the Paris Agreement. You know, we have to, every 2 years they have to report. Every 5 years they have to, we have to have a new NDC, and that has to be then applied to our long-term strategy and to the plans. So it is all engranaje. It's, well, there's a lot of instruments and elements that are coming one after the other to make this whole thing work. So I think that is how I will help to, on the one hand, manage the expectation and start to do that paradigm shift. And in case of the water rights, yes, so water not only is it very fragmented, but we have this system of private water rights. I think actually the new constitution might just override this completely. But even if not, the recent reform to our water code is also key, not as powerful, but it's also a key, and with some governance changes that we can start to make decisions at a watershed level, which is where really decisions around water have to be made. And that I really expect to be implemented this year.
Oh, excellent. We have the last four, or are there 5 people? Okay. And we'll call it a day after that.
Good afternoon. My name is Joanna, and my question pertains specifically to the 4th point of your work plan, circular economy. And I was wondering what specific steps you might be envisioning to achieve a circular economy. And I'm thinking specifically also about the issue of textile waste in the Atacama Desert, and how perhaps that might play a role. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Hello. So my question is regarding the energy sector, and as well a bit of regarding the mining sector. So both development strategies in Chile, or one development strategy in Chile, accounts for both producing hydrogen in the north and extracting lithium as well in the desert, right? And both activities are very water intensive. And making the link with the water scarcity in the country, I am very curious to understand how Chile is planning to face this issue. And also I come from Mexico, a very water-stressed country as well, which also has lithium production. So that's a good simile. Thank you.
Buenas tardes, Ministra, también de México, un gusto. My question regards the Latin American region. It's well known that we have economies that are highly reliant in exporting raw materials. We are critical for the energy transition, which is super important, of course. But I'm wondering what's your sense? Do you think in the future we will be able, as a region, to reconcile our economic interests and environmental protection? And are we going to be seen as a provider of raw materials for the energy transition, or something else? Thank you.
Go for it.
Hello, I'm Patrick, and I'm from Ghana, West Africa. And I have a brief question. It's rather more basic. We know how significant it is in involving everyone in building climate resilience and increasing our climate mitigation potential. The center of almost every climate report mentions or hinges categorically on behavioral shift. So my question to you is that what are your strategies to drive an attitudinal behavioral shift so your people would move to the use of rather to the use of public transport than maybe owning their own cars and then changing their diet and what have you? And then lastly, what is your plan of your government in implementing projects that would bring the people on board? Thank you.
Thank you. And the very last question.
Hello, I'm Louise. Thank you for being here. I'm an environmental policy student, and I'm French. And I would like to ask you a question about the international cooperation that the Chilean government have undertook to tackle climate change issues. So do you have any examples you would like to share about international governmental cooperation to tackle climate change issues? And to what extent do you think that international cooperation is needed to address climate change? Thank you.
Okay, so from behavioral change to circular economy to Atacama Desert to international cooperation.
Okay. So first I would say I should definitely learn a bit more from politicians. I've heard that they never answer really the questions, right? You get a question, you say just 5 words, and then you go on with your own message. I'm really definitely not there yet, right? I'm really trying
No,
to
sorry to say you're not there.
Yeah. Not there. But that's okay. Because
this is exactly university setting. You're doing a brilliant job. Thank you.
Okay, so circular economy and waste are of course very much related. Basically, we really need a paradigm shift from the linear economy where we extract, produce, consume, and throw away, produce waste, to one where basically waste is never produced because it's part of the design not to produce it. In that sense, there are, I would say, a couple of elements in Chile that already exist. So we have a plastic law, a law that is kind of a circular economy law. It's called La Ley de Responsabilidad Extendida del Productor. It's a very strange name, but basically it regulates a number of things really, where we're not going to produce this type of waste. But it at the moment it's just 5 sectors that are regulated, and I can say that the plan is to include the textile sector in the next one, so prioritized sector there. So it can go there. But I think that circular economy is much broader than that, regulating a couple of things, right? Where we produce waste. And I really would like to have that big umbrella where a couple of those elements are there already, but to put it under a bigger umbrella to really rethink again the way that the economy works. And I would also like, but this is a conversation that I haven't had yet. I have asked it a couple of times. The mining industry is inherently not circular, right? Because we're really taking a resource that is not renewable, and as far as I see it, it is wasted as well afterwards. So I think our mining industry should really also change the shift and maybe concentrate more in reusing the minerals that we are extracting. I know that most of the copper is probably here somewhere and not back in Chile, but we really need to be thinking, it is just not sustainable to think that we can go and extract and then dump it somewhere. So I would love to have the mining industry thinking how they can do that there as well. In general, it is a characteristic of many of the Latin American countries to have this view that economic growth and environmental protection are antagonist and that cannot be reconciled. The only thing I want to say is that that is just not possible. We will not have a planet where to grow if we don't reconcile these two, and that is just a reality, and we have to incorporate this. We have to understand this and make the changes accordingly. And then with respect to behavioral changes, very important question. Sometimes people say that culture is very difficult to change. I think we've just seen with the pandemic that culture can be changed incredibly fast. We all started wearing masks from one day to the other. We all started staying at home from one day to the other. I think it has shown us that it can change very, very quickly. And hence, it should not be an excuse that cultural changes are slow, that we need, I don't know, decades and decades of education. I think we need, the urgency is at such level that we need to move very quickly, and as I said before, on all aspects, including education. But also including taxes and all sorts of keys that are available to us. And in the case of emissions from transport, indeed, there are two realities: the developed world, where I don't know, 70 or 80% of people own cars, versus countries where car ownership is still low. It will be a very difficult trend to reverse, to not make those countries vehicle ownership is an ongoing trend. It will be a double the effort, I think, than it's here. So we have to okay, so this is also a bit related to how the approach from the developing world should be with respect to mitigation. This is my view. We know we have a principle in the Convention of Common but Differentiated Responsibilities. I would like to see an interpretation of that principle of, okay, I might not have the responsibilities, I might not have the capabilities, help me to get onto this train or ship or however you want to call it first, not be the last one. Because if we are the last ones, as usual, and we continue a dirty growth, these structural inequalities I was saying before, which are the root of the climate crisis itself, would not be solved. So I think our position should be, help me get onto this train first. And so if we have double the problem of, for example, slowing transport emission, then we have to be more aggressive even than the developed world.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. My takeaways are a couple of them, Minister. One is your very honest answer that we need to recognize trade-offs. We need to recognize trade-offs between environmental protection, social inclusivity, and economic growth, and that the past trade-offs that were made, for example, that resulted in zones of sacrifice, should never be repeated again. And so that's extremely honest, and not one normal politicians always say. The second is your ability to say that I don't know. We will know, but right now we don't have all the answers. That's another thing, again, most politicians would never ever say, because they always have all the answers. So that was wonderful to hear. And I think your last point was extremely good, and I hope the students understand that with the agreement of a global carbon budget, you're going to have countries that are in desperate need for growth possibly coming in last, possibly having to pay, if there is a global carbon market, to pay the most, or at least have a vanishingly small amount of carbon left for the development. And that is highly, highly unfair and inequitable. So I think that's what the minister was referring to when asking communities and countries that are not now part of this kind of global carbon train to get in there first. And that for me would be to rectify a historic mistake for example, of the watering down of the CBDR principle that you were saying in the Paris Climate Agreement. So with that, I think you've laid a really good foundation for all of your future visits to PSIA and to Sciences Po, and we warmly welcome you anytime you want to come. Thank you very much.